Welcome to MOTS, where we'll be applying the Manzer or Mosi Thurlow scale of quantitative analysis of pop culture narrative to a binary system.
MOTS!
This podcast contains spoilers, mature content, and language. Viewer discretion is advised. Hello and welcome back to MOTS. Today we are continuing our Oscar Best Picture countdown with Hidden Figures. Scott, would you like to begin with the usual funny logline?
Yes, so I came up with a number, but I think as a pun and perhaps relevant to the film, I came up with space racism, if you will. Spelled both ways, however way you want to take it.
So I want to start off with a little prologue here about biopics, and that I'm not the biggest fan of them going into this movie.
I'm sort of with you, but go on.
And I feel that they fall into kind of this trap where they try to stay too much to the story to the detriment of the narrative, or they function as the biopic as a framework to push a narrative and validate that narrative through a historical event.
Sure.
And I think Hidden Figures actually balances those two well, and it does fall into the trappings of both, as we'll discuss, or as I will discuss. But
I think I agree. It handles both of those aspects pretty well throughout.
Yeah.
I agree. So
I'll go over with the brief synopsis of this. This is a story about Katherine Goebel Johnson and several other females in the 1960s space race against the Russians in the Cold War. There's Dorothy Vaughan and Mary Jackson, and they're all all have different desires to pursue their careers, and they have to face sexism and prejudice. In the standard biopic fashion, they overcome all of the challenges and end up with this uplifting message in the end.
And are vindicated, sure. And deservedly so.
Yeah. And I think it earned its... but we'll discuss again that later. Anyway, Steve-O, on to you with the introduction.
I agree. All right. Film starts off in a classroom with Catherine, child Catherine.
Young Catherine.
It just kind of shows briefly how she was a prodigy mathematician, and kind of how she got her start, like getting into better schools and going, skipping grades, things like that. Cuts from there fairly quickly to a scene at the side of the road where she is grown up now, and she's there with Mary Jackson and Dorothy Vaughan, and they have broken down at the side of the car's broken down at the side of the road, and a cop pulls up, and they're nervous. And this is just kind of like a quick commentary on like the state of things, how scared they were of these, these white cops, and kind of how it went. But they end up kind of getting the better of him, and he gives them, or not getting the better of, but like he becomes convinced that they're cool, for lack of a better term.
No, well, first of all, just to point out detail, they're broken down. Dorothy, who's sort of the mechanic, is trying to fix their car.
Right.
And yeah, sure, they're unsettled. Like, it's unnerving for 3 black women, but they're on the way to work at NASA at Langley.
Right.
And they tell them that, and they basically sort of like convince them that, listen, we're trying to win the space race for our country.
Right.
Can you please help? Or like, that's what we're trying to do here. And then he immediately, that sort of turns the cop.
Yeah, and he gives them, so he comes in aggressively, but that kind of turns him, and then, so he gives them an escort to into NASA. They pretty immediately get assigned new jobs, except for Octavia Spencer's character, Dorothy, who is kind of stays where she is.
Well, she's sort of assigning the colored jobs, if you will. Like,
right. They're all computers, which is basically, humans used to do all the math, and so they are doing that, but they have their own section and all this stuff.
It's segregated, sure.
Janelle Monáe's character, Mary Jackson, gets sent off to go work with an engineer on stuff having to do with the heat shield for the capsule.
Which is what she wants.
Right, which is what she's been looking for, so she's very happy about that. And Catherine Goebel gets sent to the, what was the room called?
The Space Task Group.
Yeah, she basically becomes a computer for Kevin Costner. Which is a weird sentence to say.
I just want to interject quickly that NASA, in real life and in this movie, can either do very generic names or very saccharine names.
Yeah.
Like the space historically is called Friendship 7.
Yes.
So
They don't have time to like think about their names, so
So they get their new jobs, and they're both doing. They kind of have scenes for both of them where it shows them doing good work.
being competent.
Mary Jackson figures out what's wrong with the heat shield and like kind of diagnoses it to the engineer she's working with, which impresses him. He tells her she should go become an engineer, which comes in later in the story. And Catherine is just kind of doing good mathematics work while running. Like there's no bathroom nearby, so she has to run like a half mile away to the
Sure. But she's also like beautiful minding, essentially. Like in a sense, like
she takes all her work with her.
She's very
to
good
the
at
bathroom.
equations, and she can do them like by hand very quickly and accurately.
Mhm.
And you might also wonder why we brought up what seems like a trivial detail of a bathroom aspect, but it is a point that this movie throughout the entirety
Yes.
like focuses on.
Well,
And in fact,
it
it
has-
becomes a major plot point.
yeah,
later
it's
on.
a running gag until it comes to a head.
And it does have a very good
Payoff, sure.
summation of the whole thing, like right at the end. And at some point, they go and they find out that the Russians have gotten into orbit, which is kind of the end of the introduction.
Well, they've sent Yuri Gagarin. They've already launched Sputnik at this point.
Yuri's also
historically
they've sent a
clear.
manned flight into orbit, and now the Americans are playing catch up. That's kind of the end of the intro, and that's where the space race starts to heat up, I guess.
Yes, no, I agree with that. It's pretty accurate. And I personally thought it was I didn't think I would like this film as much as I did, so perhaps a spoiler, but I thought it was a very good setup. I like the classroom scene, and then transitioning very smoothly to the broke down scene, and then you introduce all these characters and what their specialty is within NASA, and that they're very competent, and they know what they're doing. They're just faced with, as we'll speak about, sexism and racism at the time and the place that they're working in America in general. But I think it was it drew me in pretty quickly. So.
Now, there's an interesting point that I noticed throughout this. There is a hefty formula going on here. I've seen many biopics that have played by these strict rules so you start off with a scene showing the competence of the lead. You immediately transition to a scene which is showing the immediate conflict that the main character is facing.
The troubles they're going to have to surmount. Yes.
And it goes throughout the whole thing where you have characters, you have the rival at whatever like situation they're going into here in NASA. Sheldon from Big Bang Theory is Catherine's.
It's basically Sheldon at NASA.
Yeah. But like again, though, this movie is elevated, even though it is incredibly formulaic. It's elevated by, one, great casting and acting all around, and two, a good story that is interesting, and one I hadn't heard before. So I think that even though, it is mildly it's nothing you haven't necessarily narrative-wise seen before, but it's well done for what it is, and I have to give it credit on that point.
I pretty much agree. Just my final thought about the intro is like you said, it handled trying to balance historically accurate information with narratively entertaining elements. And I think they did a quite good job. And yeah, sure, maybe it's like, I don't mean this to be negative context, but in quotes, formulaic. But I think because of what you said, the acting and the writing, it elevated itself beyond that. And I was very much, and yes, I'm biased for anything like relating to science and so forth, and the history of NASA. So I mean, I already am going to enjoy something like that, but I think it was handled well.
I like this. It's not a story. I like this because it's not a story that you've heard really, unless you like.
Well, it's
look
Hidden
into
Figures,
the history,
baby.
Unless you look into the history of NASA.
Sure.
And I really like the way that they balance their these three women, their scientific and their like emotional lives, and they did a really good job of showing that they do have like not very, but like they have complicated personal lives like anybody else. And they also had to balance like all this racism and sexism that they were battling against at their jobs, like a lot of people did at the time.
And in general.
And were, amazing people and basically, were very integral to getting a man into space as well.
Sure. So that's ones, I believe.
Yeah, I'm going to give it a 1 for sure.
Okay, and Scott, onto you with the body.
All right, so this is the bulk of the movie. So as we read, so the impetus is that the newscast comes on that the Russians have successfully launched Yuri Gagarin into space, into orbit. So now the pressure is on by like the American military-industrial complex coming down on NASA saying, listen, we need to catch up, and also, like, if we can, one-up them, at least catch up and see what else we can do. So now it's intensified. Basically, everyone's working overtime, and it, like, the sexism and racism sort of escalates. If not escalates, it's just, like, more there because, for example, when Catherine works at the space group, she comes in, pours herself a cup of coffee, and the next day they have a smaller, like, shittier pot of coffee with colored, just, like, taped around it. And, like, dealing with that. And like you said, like, yes, her having to go to the bathroom. She has to go all the way to the other side of the campus, essentially, other side of Langley. So it's balancing between, it's cutting between their personal lives and their professional lives, which they're facing increasing challenges. For example, Dorothy is basically performing the duties of a supervisor without getting the pay or the title of such, and she's trying to push for that. She's pushing towards Mrs. Mitchell, who's Kristen Dunst's character, who's sort of like the head of it. And they're both women, but of course, Kristen Dunst is mildly to obviously racist here and there. And then Mary Jackson's personal struggle is that after, as you mentioned, the engineer, after she figures out the issue with the shielding, her engineer, or her lead on the project tells her you should go back to school and become an engineer. And of course, that's a problem because segregation still was legal there in Virginia at the time. And she wishes to take courses in order to qualify to be the engineer position. So it's all that cut up, and also introduced to one of our collectively here favorite actors, Mahershala Ali, who was also in Moonlight, and he sort of plays a love interest to Catherine. He's a Army, I believe, National Guard liaison, and he's pushing for, like, you know, both that and civil rights and so forth. In general, civil rights, the whole movement itself is sort of like, I don't want to say in the background, but it's happening at the same time. It's just that they're not personally, like, as involved. Although Mary Jackson's husband is, he's sort of like within that group. So it's all that, and starts escalating. Kevin Costner's character, Alan, whatever his name was.
Alan Harrison.
Sure. So, like, he's under, yes, Alan Harrison. He's under pressure. It's almost as if all three of them earn more grudging and then actual respect from everyone who's around them in their respective spots. And they like Catherine and Mahershala's character, Jimmy Johnson, like to call him, like they sort of start up a flickering romance that unfolds slowly throughout, and they clearly have attraction to each other. So it's all that, and Catherine's like sort of impressing people with the way she can do calculations, and they're like I said, they're under more and more pressure. So she pushes for more and more, like, having more and more access to information that she needs to in order to help them out. And Dorothy decides to, she's sort of the mechanic, like, IT specialist. And as a running joke, I don't know if I mentioned this, but I'll mention it here. At this time, is NASA is getting the IBM machines in, so they're trying to get them set up. Nope, like, this is the first time anyone's ever used them, so they don't know how to, like, they can't even get them in the goddamn office at first. Like, it's a funny joke. So they finally get in, and no one, like, they couldn't figure it out, and she researches how to do it and sort of surreptitiously starts making it work until she's called out. And except she's the only one who made it work, so she's got sort of bumped up in that. She, again, respect and competence, everyone around her, like, finally, like, gives her due. And Mary Jackson goes to court to fight for her right to take night classes in order to get her degree at the, again, white segregated school, but she's allowed to in the end. She gives a very impassioned speech. So it's all very well balanced between all three characters with basically two stories, their professional and personal lives. Mm-hmm. And so they all start coming together. They're doing work. Like, so the IBM starts running, which gives them a faster way to calculate the trajectories and so forth as the pressure keeps coming down. Catherine double checks those, does her, like, again, beautiful mind thing as Mary Jackson is becoming an engineer. And I think it culminates all in when John Glenn is also there, or the fictionalized version, who is basically James Bond of NASA.
He's Captain America, man.
Yeah. He's Captain James Bond. But so, like, their next project is to launch him into orbit, a la to match the Russians with Yuri. So they're all working, like, towards that, and they finally run all the they have all the numbers, everything set up, and they're about to launch. And he, in fact, it's two or three times he is in a boardroom where Catherine impresses him with her skills, and so he calls for a double check by her right before they're about to launch. There's a quick little hiccup where the numbers don't match, but she makes sure that they're due. And then the launch is a go, and everyone around the world, of course, is watching. And I also like, just real quickly, it's Michael to style, but they intersperse, like, actual real footage with some of this stuff, which is pretty cool. I like that. So yeah, and it all comes together when the launch is about to happen, and he launches successfully, and it goes into orbit.
So there's one scene I want to point out, which I found humor in, and I think it was unintentional humor. So we brought up the bathroom incident before.
Yep.
And eventually it's getting to the point where I think 40 minutes for her to go to the bathroom.
Right.
And Al Harrison realizes that she's not there.
Oh, yeah.
And so she goes back and starts yelling at her, and she gives this
impassioned
she loses
speech,
it in a way of they're being racist to me. And it's Kevin Costner plays Al Harrison, and he has this weird look of realizing that racism exists.
Yeah, you're right. I did notice that too, as if it was never a factor in his mind.
Dawns on
The
him.
thing is, I think that's the point, though, and I think it's a very interesting scene there because
No, you're right. It's an important thing to
it's sort of
introduce or contain.
he's obviously not particularly racist.
He's been so lost in his work, he hasn't even noticed that they're treating her like shit.
All right, kids, I've allowed you to have your shenanigans, but we have real work to do, so cut out the racism.
Yeah.
And he just rips the colored sign off the coffee pot and knocks down the colored bathroom because national security takes precedence.
It's more
over
important
whatever
than this. Yeah.
whatever feelings you have. And throughout this film, they deal with racism and sexism by showing you all these different ways that it manifests.
Sure. A myriad confrontations about it. Sure.
And this is one example of a person who is by inaction being sexist and racist just by, in a sense, ignorance there.
Sure.
So it was again, there was interspersed these little scenes. Sometimes, they were heavy-handed on it, but a lot of times they did these kind of subtle messaging, which was pretty neat.
Sure. No, I did overall. I don't want to say I liked the way they handled it, but I think it was true to form, at least as far as I understand. I can't speak personally about it, but I think it was handled very well. At least it was portrayed well by everybody. And I'll just real quickly mention Sheldon, or Jim Parsons' character, that he was a lead mathematician, I believe, on the launch, on the rocket launch, and he also eventually, at first, of course, was standoffish, as almost everybody else was, but eventually, via respect of Catherine's work, they came to understanding, and they worked together to make the launch happen. So, yeah, I think it was all handled very well, and I can't really say much more.
I will say that they didn't go... I don't want to say they didn't go overboard, because that's a weird way to put it, but there were no scenes of just blatant
it wasn't too egregious
or anything like that in this, which they certainly could have put in and it would have been believable. But I thought that this movie in here, and maybe I'm getting a little bit more into themes at this point, but they handled this insofar as talking about all these little things that you don't none of the people at the time were thinking about. They probably had no idea they were being racist, and they bring that up a couple times, but were ways of keeping people down or quote unquote in their place or whatever.
Well, to build off that, and again, this is going to themes a little bit, but I just want to respond to that, is, oftentimes you see aggressive racism in these types of films. However, here it was exploring both a passive racism, as I mentioned earlier, but also passive-aggressive racism.
Yeah.
And those are, I feel, not tackled that often as a message. But no, we'll talk more about that in themes.
Sure, but you're right. I mean, those things were contained there in the body, and I think, like I said, they handled them well. They were integrated well, and I enjoyed all of it. So I'm giving it a 1.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm going to give it a 1 as well.
All right.
I will as well.
All right.
And on to me with a conclusion. Now, we briefly touched upon John Glenn, but he actually, first of all, the actor John Glenn Powell, played... it was, in a sense, almost insufferably charming, but I looked it up, and John Glenn was...
Hey, man, John Glenn's a hell of a guy in real life, apparently.
Insufferably charming. And...
Well, that was a real story, that he made her check his... check all the numbers and wouldn't go up until she checked all the numbers, until she double-checked all the numbers.
I'm actually incredibly interested in John Glenn after seeing this film, but so I was looking it up, and the historian was saying that when he was flying up, they had a slight scene where they had a woman painting a thing on his capsule.
Mm-hmm.
And he actually had to fight for her to come paint that on because they wouldn't let a woman into the field to do that. And like I was watching a NASA historian like discuss the historical accuracy and inaccuracies in this film. And so it was like a neat little touch there, but nonetheless,
That's
John Glenn's up in space. His capsule, the heat shield starts failing, which I think was a reference to Mary Jackson.
Well, the warning light comes on, but regardless.
She does say something too. Like she's nowhere near anybody, but she's like, don't release the payload or whatever the hell it was that they were not supposed to do.
So it's kind of this climactic scene and this final tension as they have to help John Glenn get back to Earth and with this issue that could cause him to burn up when he re-enters. And they succeed, and everyone has happy ending. Was it Dorothy Vaughan ends up getting supervisor and is now, in a sense, teaching Fortran and running programming for NASA. Kat Goebel Johnson now has the respect, and she gets invited on to help the mission to the moon.
Yep.
Mary Jackson graduates and I assume becomes an engineer.
They said she becomes the first woman engineer, black woman.
Yeah. So they did do the
black
like,
female engineer ever at NASA and also in history.
So I mean, like it's a very kind of tugs at the heartstrings.
Absolutely.
Kind of ending. Like if you have a warm sense of accomplishment, even though you didn't do anything but watch a film at the end of this. Sure. And I think that exactly what it's going for. As I said, it's a formulaic movie, but done very well, and it hits every note it needs to hit. And so,
yeah, I would say that this was a very well done movie, but at the end, it kind of felt good to finally this Oscar season see a feel good movie where like everything else is like depressing as hell. And like, you know what? I love depressing movies and
I'm already depressed.
But like it was nice to sneak one in there that had like a, you know, good positive message at the end. Things work out for these ladies, and also it being a true story, you know, taught me several things and like got me to look into several things after I watched it, which I, you know, just as you said earlier, Sky, you like all this like science and especially stuff about NASA is really interesting, and it definitely is interesting to go back and look at all that stuff and see how it worked, and you know, kind of get the alternate history that you didn't actually get when you're going into school for it.
No, I agree with all that, of course. I thought it was very well handled. I thought it achieved narrative closure, if we are using that still as a scale. And yeah, sure, it was like, I want to say it's uplifting without feeling cheap or saccharine about it, so I can respect the film a lot on that front.
No, it definitely earned.
Yeah,
it built up the narrative capital.
That's the word I was going to use. It was perfectly earned, and it wrapped up exactly when it needed to be. And you know, you sort of leaves you feeling with an uplifting sort of sense.
Yeah.
So I'll definitely give it a good score. I'll give it a 1.
I'm giving it a 1 as well. That's absolutely how I felt. You know, it was an earned happy ending, which a lot of times a happy ending will feel unearned, or like, you know, you didn't
or just
build up enough
or
emotional, you know.
I just have one last comment to make on that. I also feel that although I know it was dumbed down in certain ways, the way they handled like the mathematics and telling, it made it accessible for people who otherwise wouldn't, but still didn't feel false.
I agree.
Right.
So
yep, you're right. I'll give it credit on that as well.
Steve-O, on to you for themes.
All right. Well, the themes, I had a couple things written down. They're like sexism and racism in that time, and while trying to make a life for yourself is obviously one of the big themes. It was kind of this idea of like aspiring to be something bigger than what you're allowed to be.
Than what society says you are. Yeah, sure.
And like that feeds right into the, you know, the feel good ending of this. And what I actually was impressed by is it kind of gave little feel good moments throughout the movie, but it never like
it sprinkles them.
It never really like you were saying, had it built up this capital. It never spent all of its capital until the very end, which was nice. Like, you know, you just had these little moments of victories, but then you had like small setbacks and things like that. You know,
but they were still facing an obstacle. For sure.
I mean, I'm not going to go super deep into themes. I think it was all fairly obvious what they were trying to get at and talk about.
No, I agree with that. And like you said, like those themes are obvious, but I think they were handled quite deftly. Again, if I'm qualified, whatever, in a sense, qualified to speak upon either of those themes, I didn't feel like overwhelmed or overburdened. But sure, it was contained therein, and I believe that probably was what it was like, if not worse, or maybe just like that. But certainly, it was handled well in my eyes.
So I might get hate for this, but there was an interesting sub-message to the racism and sexism that I saw crop up throughout this film. So I'm going to begin my example with Mary's husband, who is more of a revolutionary when it comes to...
Well, I don't know about that. He was part of this Black Civil Rights Movement.
He was, but he promoted like aspects. I'm not going to say that he was like
all right
that intense into it, but he promoted a certain viewpoint of the way to go forward.
If you want something, you have to take it.
Yes.
Basically, that was his... Yeah.
This was a more pragmatic approach to solving sexism and racism, which was the idea is that if you do a quality job, you will get recognition. And I think that, I don't know if it necessarily was intended, but I felt that there was that kind of message throughout, like, stay in school, do work, and like it's almost an American dream kind of naivety to it, if you will. That like if you stay the course,
I see what you mean.
And do what you're supposed to do, everything will come to you. And while it's true for these three, there are plenty of examples of that not working out. Now, granted, is it an uplifting message because of their success? Yes, but I don't know if, I don't know how intended that was.
Well, there is a small line that I'd like to point out now that you're talking about this that is kind of like, could be viewed as just a throwaway line, but I think it's really important to the movie where Mary Jackson says, not everybody, man, I forget what the exact line is, but it's like, not everybody fights the same way, pretty much.
No,
and she's like, what's right for you isn't right for me, or something like that. And it's, so I think just by that line, I think that this movie's trying to say, listen, that way,
Avenue,
being more violent or taking the things that you want is not wrong. It's just not what we're focused on here in this movie. Sure. And I think that was their way. That was their way of throwing a little line into it and saying that look, we're not saying that you can't do that or that you shouldn't do that, but this is another way.
Sure, and I agree with most of that. And no, I just wanted to point out, if not a humorous thing, if we're equating this year's noms to last year's, this is closest to The Martian, I would say, just because the obvious connections. But also, if you're smart enough and competent and good enough, then you can achieve what you want within NASA because, again, as a humorous sub-theme, perhaps, sub-context because scientists are rational. And if you show them that you're good at science, then all prejudice will melt away.
As I said, the pragmatic approach.
Yes.
I also wanted to just build off of that quickly. This film is obviously a call to arms for women and minorities to join STEM programs, and that, you're a young girl who wishes to study mathematics, you go ahead. If you're
sure.
And good. That's a good message.
Yeah,
I mean,
I'm
that
cool
is
with
actually a problem in America.
We probably need that. Yeah, I agree. So I'm going to give themes a 1.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. I like I said, it's not, they don't go crazy deep with it or anything, but they do a very good job of
definitely
addressing the themes that they do address in this.
Okay, Scott, onto you with antagonist.
All right. Well, I think we said sexism, race, prejudice in general. And sure, this is a period piece based on a true story. So, I mean, you have to take that just going into it. But again, I think it was handled well. And yeah, they faced it constantly. And like I said, I don't know if I'm qualified to speak upon it, but I imagine it was something like that. And if you're a person in that position, however it may be, I'm sure it was grating on you, like it had to have been. So, like we said, it wasn't overbearing, but it wasn't whitewashed either, if you will. It wasn't hidden behind the scenes. It was there in your face. They face these problems, they face these issues in both their personal life, in their community, and at their professional jobs. So yeah, I mean, overcoming it, and I guess Russia also. I'm, just kidding, but no, seriously, it's that, it's the racism, sexism thing, overcoming society's prejudice, society's oppressing of any certain group, whatever it may be, and this happened to be in the early '60s during the space race in Virginia, at Langley. So I think it was handled very well, and I think it was an effective one because they came up against it, and in fact they overcame it in the end and earned the respect of everybody around them.
So, Kat, Dorothy, and Mary are my 3 protagonists for this. You can make the argument that Kat is the sole protagonist, but I think that
I think it's
complement
collective.
each other. And I think each of them has their own antagonist that they face. Catherine, and I'm just not just talking about the overarching like pressures, but Catherine has her foil in Sheldon, who, again, I don't necessarily know if Jim Parsons' character is necessarily racist, if not just a like kind of academic rivalry type thing. He might have.
Well, he's certainly sexist.
He's nerdist.
I'll tell you that.
He's sexist, certainly, but he's definitely. But it's more of like the idea of like, how dare someone challenge my intellectual authority. Dorothy has Kirsten Dunst's character as her foil, and like that's the most overt kind of racism involved there. But I think Mary Jackson's foil is really clever in that I would say it's her husband.
I knew you were going to say that, and I don't know if I agree.
Because this explores, as I mentioned earlier, different types of sexism and racism, but it also explores in group and outside kind of things, and the idea that like a woman, the view that a woman has her place within the people who are supposed to be supporting you, where you have Jim Johnson say that to Catherine, like a woman doing mathematics, kind of dismissive of it, and her husband, who he eventually comes over to her side and is supportive, but it's initially like you should be at home and taking care of our children as opposed to trying to be an engineer at NASA. And there's all these different, like, it's a smorgasbord of isms, and it works very well. Because I think it dares to explore the nuance of these isms.
Yeah, I was actually, so I'm going to side with both of you guys on this, but Ian, I think that's a really awesome take on it, and like something I had considered that type of, like, each one of them has their own antagonist, but now that you pointed out, like the how they explore a different type of antagonist with each one of them is, I think, really brilliant in this movie. Like they each have their own type of, racism, sexism, whatever ism that to deal with.
Sure.
And I think it is really kind of, I don't want to say like tricky that they make Mary Jackson's foil her husband, and you're absolutely right that it is, and it's just like that kind of like nagging doubt that you're trying to put on somebody that is close, they're
supposedly
that's close
supporting
to you,
you,
that's supposed to be supporting
Sure.
you, that who isn't, and the fact that she was strong enough to stand up to him, and actually he's the one that probably has the least effect on her, because she just seems like she's the most self-confident of the three of them. And she kind of is like, here's what I'm doing. If you don't like it, I'll fucking yell at you in the middle of this picnic. I don't give a shit. And like, I like her character for that, but also I think that's really interesting that you point out the different types of antagonists that they each have, and it shows how they each deal with it in their own way. So I don't know if we're talking anymore about antagonists, but
I mean, I'm just gonna wrap up. But I largely agree that I knew Ian was gonna say that because I thought of it like literally as you were speaking, and it's not that I don't disagree. I was gonna like sort of delve into it, but I think it's still there. I think it's both. Like you're right. In her case, that it's almost like an internal antagonist, like it's someone who should be on her side in her community supporting her, but she's still facing pushback. So I came up with this analogy. If you like it, if not, too bad.
throw it back.
It's almost
Throw it right back.
It's almost like a rainbow of antagonists, whereas each spectrum, like each of them faces a different spectrum of the rainbow, but it's still a broad, over-encompassing thing.
No, that's
Right.
absolutely true.
So, I mean, I think it was handled well, and I'll give them all a 1 for effectiveness.
Yeah, I'm going to give it a strong 1 as well.
All right, it's on to me with protagonists, and I already mentioned the 3 of them. All of them were very effective, and I think that they did a good job of also representing different types of women.
or just people in general. Like,
oh yeah, that's actually, you had the Catherine's the meek, but very intelligent character. You have Mary, who's the confident and outgoing type, and you have Dorothy, who's kind of the motherly figure,
matron. Sure.
And I think it's a good way, it's a good choice to have this as broad of a, if the antagonists were smorgasbord, this is a good buffet of protagonists to be able to pick and choose from. And so everyone should be able to identify with someone in this.
No, you're right. And I think I mentioned this, but if not, I'll mention it here just real quickly. Like, I very much appreciate the fact that each of them were their own fully fledged characters, and they had their own specialties. Mm-hmm. So when you were following one, you know that, like, for example, Catherine was doing theoretical math, whereas Dorothy was doing the IT science, computer engineering, or not, just computing language, whereas then Mary was doing the actual material working with building and figuring out the what's wrong with the actual materials or how they can compensate. So yeah, I like them all. I think they were acted quite well, very top notch. They were all believable characters, and they had to share screen time, of course, between three of them. But I think, yes, I agree collectively that all three of them were in fact the protagonists, and they all did a very good job. And I enjoyed following whatever was happening on each of their stories. I was engaged every time.
I just realized something interesting, that there's a symbolic moment for all three of them, mm-hmm. of when they get accepted into their role.
The various things.
So Mary was given a gift of mechanical pencils by her husband.
Mm-hmm.
Al Harrison passes the chalk to
Catherine.
To Catherine.
He also gets her this is later, but he also gets her that pearl necklace.
No, kind of.
Yeah, but there's that. I think that's the symbolic. The symbolic moment is the passing of the, and Dorothy gets past the
cards.
No, not the cards. No. The supervisor.
Yeah.
So I just noticed that.
No, you're right. I mean, that's a very nice touch, and it all it just helped round it out. So I think I'm going to give them all three of them a very strong one.
Yeah, I very much liked all three of them. I don't have too much more to add on that. I thought that their characters were super interesting, and honestly, I'm probably going to continue to look up more about them.
Research.
Sure. Because I think that's a really interesting story. And,
sure.
And now I'm sure there's a lot more information about it out than there was, but I'm sure there was still a ton.
I believe there's a book about it, nonfiction on the bestsellers right now.
Yeah,
so.
I do. I wouldn't mind reading that either. But
so check it out, I guess, if you want.
And B, all of these actresses did a phenomenal job. Mm-hmm. Every single one of them. And I think this is Janelle Monáe's second movie after Moonlight, which is also nominated for an Oscar this year. And she's doing a
everyone's double cover in the Oscar movies.
Yeah. So,
but anyway,
I don't.
Yep.
I don't have enough good things to say about protagonists. I'm just gonna give it a 1, and
all right,
we'll move on to supporting.
Yep, with you. So
with me,
you talking.
All right. There are a bunch of supporting characters in this. It's a fairly big cast. A few important ones. I'll probably leave a couple of them for you guys, but Costner's character, Al, what's his last name?
Harrison.
Al Harrison. You have, and I guess I'll name a couple that you guys probably won't think of. The cop at the beginning was kind of a humorous and
sure.
little short intro into the world.
Exactly.
Played somewhat of an important role actually. I love the comment that Mary has where she's following right behind him. She's like three black women chasing a white cop down the road.
This is a miracle.
This has never happened before ever. Whatever.
I think you said it's a miracle.
Yeah.
So anyway, right, that was a funny moment.
And I guess the kids are all Catherine's kids are also secondary characters.
I thought they did a good job,
and they did a fine job. They weren't there for too long.
They were in the film.
They weren't there for too long, but they all had their own little speaking parts, and they. I
believe that they were a family though, so sure, I'll give them credit on that.
And I have a bunch more. I'll let you guys go, and then if you guys miss any that I'm thinking of, I'll jump in.
All right, so you're right. It's sort of an ensemble, secondary cast. So Kirsten Dunst, as we said, Kim Costner, Parsons, and all that. So it's not. I know tradition is to pick out one we liked, but I think to me, for this film specifically, I didn't have a favorite specifically, but I think they filled out the world. So collectively, I'll probably give them a 1, a good score. Because yes, they did a good job. Everybody handled their role very well and believable again. And their interactions with themselves, with each other and to the main characters, to the three women, were all very well done. So I can't say one over the other was better to me. I just think they all collectively fulfilled that role and portrayed it well, that I enjoyed it overall. But I can't pick out. I'm not going to choose one over the other for you guys, because I think they're all pretty much equal. The sum is equal to one.
Well, I'm going to give 2 then, because Scott. One, Mahershala Ali is one of my favorite actors.
Yes,
nowadays.
he was very good, but he didn't have enough screen time.
He didn't have enough screen time, and but I still have to give him
fair enough. Giving him props.
He can make a lot out of a small role.
That's true.
Mm-hmm.
And John Glenn Powell was
Sure.
he had
He was fine.
charm to spare, and if, as you mentioned, Captain America before, if Chris Evans dies tragically, they should hire this guy.
This guy should be.
him.
Sure.
I was saying this before the podcast. Initially, for like 2 seconds, I thought he was Chris Evans.
Well, now
I was
you're
like,
just being
Chris
racist
Evans-
yourself.
Chris Evans in this? Sure.
But anyways,
Against against Evans's.
sure.
But again,
Against Captain America's.
He didn't have. Although I guess he did have a big part in this,
But he didn't have much screen time.
yeah.
But what he
but
did,
he
yeah.
made use of his screen time.
exactly. So I'll give him, like I said, all a 1 overall, like a solid 1. I think they filled out the world and did a good job playing off of each other. And like I said, the main three girls, 3 women.
All right, Scott, continue talking with dialogue.
All right, so this one is a bit difficult for me. Like, my initial impression is to give it a 1, just because I think like there was no cringeworthy moments. I don't believe I remember any. And even though at times it was almost like America is the best, like sort of Martian kind of speech. Like, I get that. It's almost like you're gonna have to have that in this kind of film, especially given the nature of the history behind it. Like, I get it. So I don't think it was too egregious. So I may just give it like my serviceable seal of approval 1 here. Like, okay. There were a couple of standout, like, I know Steve will probably, and you guys, both of you might point out a couple of like shining examples of good, like, snappy dialogue. And I probably would agree with it. I don't think it deserves a 0, even though I think it might be, if I phrase it this way, the weakest part of the film, but not bad. Just the other things were better beyond it. So what do you guys think?
Well, I would agree with you, except for I thought that there was one standout scene for like every single character, including well, not every single character, not all the supporting characters, but like including like Costner's character had a great speech, and for the most part, you're right about the like rah rah America parts, except for when Costner was like, "Listen, the Russians are kicking our ass. Like, we're getting killed by these guys. Like, what are we gonna do? Like, he's like, I refuse to believe that
they're smarter,
they're
better,
smarter
whatever,
than us. What? Like,
just
what
working
are we?
harder.
Why are we failing?
Sure.
Yeah, exactly. And
Sure, I remember that.
I guess that is still kind of a rah rah America like speech, but it was admitting that we were getting our asses kicked.
Fair enough.
Which was nice and like somewhat refreshing. They probably didn't even have to do that. Catherine has her speech about the coffee pot in the bathroom that is very rousing and like really well written.
Yeah, I'm not.
Mary
saying
Jackson's
it's not.
just snappy every time she's on fucking camera, basically, like Janelle Monáe's character. And Dorothy certainly has her moments too, with when she's confronting Kirsten Dunst.
Sure, you're right about that. That's fair.
So, I think the dialogue was more often stronger than weaker. Though I might give a soft 1 for this, but still 1 nonetheless.
That's probably what I'm going to come down on.
There's a lot of, again, as I said, snappy dialogue. And here's the thing is, there is rah-rah American speech, but it's not as bad as The Martian was.
Yeah, true.
No,
you're right.
right.
It wasn't as egregious. You're right about that. I definitely agree with that. So,
And I enough that I can forgive it.
it was
for
more
its-
subtly handled, at least compared to that, and I'll agree with that. So I'll give it a 1, soft 1, or solid 1, but it was fine.
And now
That's good.
I'm going to probably break from the pack here with style. In that there's things I liked about the style. The period, dress and costuming, and
Setting
all look
yeah.
good. Kevin Costner looked like the guy from Falling Down.
Michael Douglas is
Yeah, so
sure.
I'm hoping there's a sequel. But
Falling NASA. Anyway,
the thing is that I have to punish this movie somewhere for this. It is formulaic in its execution. Doesn't make it a bad movie, but it surely doesn't make it an innovative movie. And I have to give it a 0 here for that.
now see, you've convinced me slowly over the years of doing these reviews that the more I like something, the more harshly I should probably judge it. And here's the thing, to me, I was initially leaning towards a middle of the road, like solid soft 1. But you're right, like Steve might have something to say about this, but to me, now having heard you say that and thinking about it at this time, there was nothing quite stand out. Yes, it was all competently shot and done. Don't get me wrong. It was very, like, nothing was jarring, and like I said, there's one thing that might convince me, as I mentioned earlier, that they intersperse like actual real footage. But is that like a credit to the film because you're just basically using real footage?
But that's not
no, I get
innovative of this.
I understand that. That's what I'm saying.
Something that other period
so
pieces
now I'm
have
like
done.
now I'm flipping back that like yeah, like I might defaultly give it just because it was competently done, as you said, but nothing like it wasn't innovative, nor did it stand out to me on these fronts. So like again, it's not a fault. I'm not saying it's a bad thing about the movie, but I just don't think like it. I'm going to just give it not enough credit to give it a 1, even though I easily could have. But because I'm judging it some more harshly, and that's like you said, I kind of want to take. I don't want to take credit away, but I feel as if I should at least pull back a bit. And this is the question I'm going to do so on. So
I came into this not 100% sure what I was going to give it, but I thought I was going to give it a 1. However, you guys may have just both convinced me. This is not a style that you haven't seen before.
Yeah, this doesn't grab you, right?
I don't remember really the soundtrack.
There were a few jazzy-ish songs. And
and it was fine, but it wasn't like super memorable to me. Maybe to you guys it was. For me, it wasn't.
It was okay, just not memorable. You know, it was a difference.
It was sure well shot in the style of movies that have come before.
Biopics, right?
But there wasn't anything that set it apart, I don't think, style-wise. There was a lot that set this movie apart, but style-wise, I'm not sure there was.
Yeah, that's well said. I think that might encapsulate my feelings on it.
So, like I said, I was gonna go the straight 10 route, but I think you guys both convinced me that this is gonna be a 9. Which I really like. I really like this movie a lot, and it disappoints me a little bit that it got 1 point less than I thought it was going to get, but not too much. I mean, I think that's a fair assessment of the style of this movie. So I'm going to give it a 0 for style as well.
No, yeah, like I said, it's not a negative or a mark against the film in any way. It's just that we've seen more interestingly shot films and style-wise and so forth, and better use of style. So again, maybe that's the nature of this film. It's a biopic, so they can't introduce anything like La La Land, say, or something like that. But yeah, it's not a mark against it. It's just that in this case, it was just done as it needed to be, but that means it's not elevated in any way.
To preempt you on this, if we had given it a 10, you'd ask, does this movie deserve a 10? I'd probably say, no, it deserves a 9.
Yeah, I would probably say the same.
Anyway, Scott or Steve-O, onto you with recommendation.
Oh yes, you should watch this movie. It is chock full of interesting historical items. It's a emotional thrill ride. Like Ian was saying earlier, it really does like tug at your heartstrings while you're watching it, which is, not a bad thing. They navigate that well without it becoming super saccharine, and not only will you learn something, but you'll have a good time doing it. So it's definitely a 1 for me.
Okay, well, I did not go into this movie expecting to like it, and I came out of this movie spending 3 hours on Wikipedia.
So if that's a recommendation, I don't know what is.
I think that this movie will be shown in many high schools and like middle schools.
It should be, yeah.
And
rightly so,
yeah.
I agree. Yeah.
And I think, this is definitely worth, whoever you are, aside from like a terrible racist or sexist, you would enjoy the message behind like what this movie has to offer, and it's interesting, and you'll find someone to root for in this. So go watch it. Yeah,
I mean, root for science, but I agree. Like, yeah, going into it, I thought I would have thought this movie was okay, not as good as I think it is now, having seen it, and I think it's very well done. I can see now why it's in the running. And yeah, like you said, it's an interesting, based on a true story, and perhaps that will spur people to learn more about it, or just enjoy it as such. And those of us who want to learn more about it and research it, maybe so. But yeah, I think it deserves to be seen. I think it's very, very well done, and I think it deserves to be in the nomination this year. Yeah, go see it if you can. It was excellent movie, and you should have a good time with it if anything about this appeals to you.
All right, so that's it. This is an easy one. We all gave it 9s for an overall aggregate score of 9. I'm Jonathan Ian Manser, here with Stephen Ramosi.
Have a good night.
And Scott Thurlow.
And I'll be Sexist in Space. See ya.
Editing and engineering by Jonathan Ian Manser. Music by Christopher Morgan. Check us out on YouTube and iTunes for the shows, and on Facebook and Twitter for updates.